It's true, the Bee Gees are unforgettable, and their songs will live on forever in our memories. The trio of brothers made their mark in the music world in the 70s, becoming leading artists of the disco era. Their hits were infectious, their albums memorable, and their songwriting and production skills highly praised. Even when the disco era came to an end, the Bee Gees did not stop and continued to work on creative musical projects and collaborate with other artists. In 1955, seeking a better life, brothers Barry, Robin, Maurice, and Leslie Gibb moved with their parents to Manchester, England. It was there that their youngest brother Andy was born. As reported by the biography website, their parents Hugh and Barbara Gibb were talented artists. Hugh was a drummer and band leader, while Barbara was a singer. Undoubtedly, the boys inherited their parents' musical DNA. The Gibbs hoped to find a better life in Manchester, but the area was still recovering from World War II, and the family was struggling to survive. We can add to that fact that their son Robin Gibb was becoming a juvenile delinquent. He had a reputation as a pyromaniac, known for playing with matches and setting billboards on fire. Apparently, Manchester's local police became aware of Robin's troubles and suggested that the family consider immigrating to Australia, something that the parents eventually did due to the family's difficult economic situation and in an attempt to keep their children out of trouble. The Bee Gees are one of the greatest bands to have emerged in Australia. Immensely popular worldwide in the mid-20th century, the trio scored 9 #1 hits in the United States and another 5 at the top of the UK charts, not far from their hometown. Despite Barry, Robin, and Maurice Gibb growing up and starting their career in Australia, they were born in the late 1940s in Douglas, the capital of the Isle of Man, a small territory next to Great Britain. In August 1958, all the Gibbs moved to Australia, eventually settling in Redcliffe, where soon after, the 3 older boys formed a singing group. Although their parents were artists, the Gibb brothers realized their talents and ambitions on their own. Neighbors from that period remember Barry strumming his tennis racket and performing on a dock, with Robin and Maurice always behind him. As recalled in the Bee Gees biography from 2003, one day Barbara Gibb came home and found her father-in-law watching TV. She offered to turn off what seemed to be a radio playing in another room, but upon approaching, she realized the music was coming from Barry and his brothers, singing in harmony. Even in England, they performed in commercial establishments, but their lives would only change in Australia. In 1959, Barry earned small change by selling sodas during races at the Redcliffe Speedway Event Center. Eventually, he drew Robin and Maurice into the business. Their guitar and combined vocals attracted potential customers. They caught the attention of the venue's owner, Bill Good, who invited them to sing over a loudspeaker system between weekend races. Not only was the owner impressed, but also an Australian radio DJ named Bill Gates, who was present that day. Both agreed to invest in the boys and gave them the name the Bee Gees, using the initials of their name. However, according to the Vancouver pop music website, in 1963, the band signed their first recording contract with Festival Records, and it was during this time that the Bee Gees evolved into the Bee Gees. With the departure of Bill Good and Bill Gates, the mistaken idea emerged that BG meant Gibb Brothers. The trio of brothers began performing at open-air exhibitions and went further, appearing on Australian TV programs and talent shows. They also played in theaters, nightclubs, and bars, even as children. With their career clearly on the rise, Hugh Gibb finally dedicated himself to managing his son's careers full-time. Besides taking care of their appearances and stage performances, he often provided a professional element by joining the boys on stage to play drums. Hoping to find more work and recording opportunities, Hugh eventually took the family to Sydney. Between 1963 and 1966, the group released 11 singles in Australia, none of which became a hit. Frustrated with the failure of the songs, the Gibb family returned to England in early 1967. While traveling home, they received news that their latest single, Spicks and Specks, had entered the top 10 of the Australian charts. Just a few weeks after their arrival in England, the family received a phone call from Robert Stigwood, a partner of the famous Beatles manager Brian Epstein. Still in Australia, the boys had sent a batch of recordings to the office that managed the Beatles in hopes of a possible contract. Robert had heard the tapes they sent and was impressed with their compositions and singing. The manager arranged for the Bee Gees to audition at the Seville Theatre, a venue Brian Epstein had rented for plays and concerts. On February 24, 1967, after just one show, he offered a 5-year contract to the band. Together with drummer Colin Peterson and guitarist Vince Maloney, the boys recorded their demos at Polydor Studios and the final cuts at the famous IBC Studios in London. They were joined by Ozzy Byrne and conductor Bill Shepherd, who would collaborate with the group for years. The final result was the album Bee Gees First, which contained their first international hit, the folk ballad New York Mining Disaster 1941. From then on, the fate of the Bee Gees as music legends was inevitable, as was the worsening relationship between the brothers. The band recorded many songs between 1967 and 1968, opening up the possibility of a double album. For commercial reasons, they decided to release a single album, but it was the first to popularize the Gibbs' career. Then came the albums Horizontal and Idea in 1968, and Odessa in 1969, the latter being the last album with Robin's presence before a brief separation. Even as brothers, the Bee Gees did not avoid internal conflicts. Although the older brother Barry Gibb was considered the leader of the group, Robin Gibb was seen as the better singer and the lead voice. After some internal fights caused by their individual ambitions and mutual pride, Robin left the brothers and attempted a solo career in 1969. In an interview with the Sunday night program in 2012, Barry stated that his brother wanted success more than anything, and that drove him crazy. After Robin's departure and the firing of drummer Colin Peterson, the Bee Gees were not successful, and Barry and Maurice tried solo careers but were unsuccessful. The 70s arrived, and the situation of the band was about to change. Robin Gibb rejoined the Bee Gees in 1970, and they achieved their first hit in the USA in 1971 with How Can You Mend a Broken Heart, the opening track of the album Trafalgar. This brought them their first Grammy nomination. It became clear that the Bee Gees were better together than as solo artists. Between 1970 and 1975, the band released 6 albums. 2 years on, 1970, Trafalgar, 1971, To Whom It May Concern, 1972, Life in a Tin Can, 1973, Mr. Natural, 1974, and Main Course, 1975. The latter album, a mix of funk, R&B, pop, soul, and country, marked a pivotal moment in the band's career. Here, a dramatic change occurred, with Robin's vocals being replaced by Barry's falsetto, which would become a trademark of the Bee Gees. The major success of this album was Jive Talkin'. Its rhythm was inspired by the sound a car made while crossing the Julia Tuttle Causeway in between Florida and Miami Beach, as Barry mentioned in an interview. With faster beats, blending funk, disco music, a beautiful synth bass sound, keyboards, and guitars, it was a big surprise in the band's catalog, as they had never recorded anything like it before. The Bee Gees enjoyed global success in the latter half of the 70s, strongly associated with the sounds, appearance, and sensibility of the disco music phenomenon that captivated the world for about 5 years. This genre inspired their 1976 album Children of the World, featuring tracks like You Should Be Dancing and Love So Right. Finally, the Gibb brothers achieved pop star status, but what came next was even more spectacular. In 1977, the Bee Gees began producing several songs that would become the soundtrack for the movie Saturday Night Fever. This happened because the band's manager Robert Stigwood was entering the movie industry business and agreed to finance and produce the film. The band agreed to create a series of songs for this production, which became enormously successful and for some years was the best-selling soundtrack album of all time. Now the Bee Gees, instead of being shadows of the British success generated by the Beatles and Rolling Stones, were creating their own musical culture, influencing even other artists. Stayin' Alive, How Deep Is Your Love, Night Fever, More Than a Woman, and If I Can't Have You were huge disco music hits. They had reached the top and didn't want to leave anytime soon. The trio spent 1978 composing, producing, and recording the next album that would follow the success of Saturday Night Fever. Also, in the same year, they starred in a musical comedy based on Beatles songs called Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. In 1979, Spirits Having Flown was released, featuring hits like Tragedy and Too Much Heaven. The end of the disco era and the rise of other genres like hard rock in the early 80s profoundly affected the fame of the Bee Gees. Nothing would ever be the same again, but they had left their mark on the music world forever, and they certainly had much to show to the public and proved that they were still relevant. They were already rich and famous musicians well before the emergence of disco music, and the group remained an active titan in the entertainment industry even after the genre's decline. Even when they were no longer playing or composing music for themselves, they were writing for other artists. Several popular and well-known songs that were hits for other artists were written by the Bee Gees. According to the official Grammy website, these songs include Dionne Warwick's Heartbreaker, Island in the Stream by Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton, Celine Dion's Immortality, Chain Reaction by Diana Ross, and Frankie Valli's Grease. Barry Gibb even wrote one of Barbra Streisand's famous songs, Woman in Love. The Bee Gees recorded throughout the 80s, 90s, and 2000s without the success of before, but they were still active. Between 1981 and 2000, they released 7 albums: Living Eyes, 1981, ESP, 1987, One, 1989, High Civilization, 1991, Size Isn't Everything, 1993, Still Waters, 1997, and This Is Where I Came In, 2001, the latter making a golden conclusion to the Bee Gees' career. It's worth mentioning that they embarked on a world tour that started at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas on November 14, 1997. With positive reviews from critics and sold-out shows, the tour resulted in one of the best-selling music DVDs in history, as well as a live CD. The unique show, which at one point would be the Bee Gees' live farewell, featured hits from what was already an incredible 4-decade period of classic music, including a guest appearance by Celine Dion and a tribute to their deceased brother Andy. After the promotion of their last album, the Bee Gees took a break in their career to pursue new directions individually. The separation of a band is never easy, and it becomes more difficult when the members are from the same family. The fact is that the relationship between the brothers was not great. In fact, it never was. It's no secret to anyone that Barry and Robin Gibb never got along well, and this only worsened with Maurice's death, who was considered a mediator between the two. Despite the disagreements, the familial bonds of the brothers were strong, and only death could stop the Bee Gees. Maurice had a long history with alcoholism, which severely impacted his long-term health. According to the coroner's report, he had a twisted intestine similar to a knot. On January 8, 2003, the musician was taken to the hospital complaining of severe stomach pains, and the next day suffered a heart attack and underwent emergency abdominal surgery, but died 3 days later at the age of 53. Maurice was known as the most extroverted of the 3 brothers. Robin stated that he was the one who kept the band together. Unfortunately, he also passed away in May 2012 at the age of 62, leaving Barry Gibb as the only living member of the Bee Gees. Robin's health problems were constant from 2010, when he was diagnosed with colon and liver cancer, for which he initially seemed to have miraculously recovered. In 2011, he underwent surgery for an intestinal blockage, the same problem that caused Maurice's death. Weeks before his death, he had pneumonia and was in a coma for a time. In an interview with the Irish Times in 2020, Barry said, "The best moments of our lives happened before we were famous. There was no competition. It didn't matter who sang what. Everything had to be unanimous. If one of us was unhappy with something, we wouldn't do it." Obviously, the brothers functioned musically, but their personal relationship was difficult. Barry spoke about this to the Stuff website in New Zealand in 2017. "I remember many intense discussions, not speaking to each other for weeks and then getting back together. We separated in 1969, and yet my brothers came to my wedding in 1970. We started talking again, and suddenly we were back in the studio." In 2020, HBO produced the documentary The Bee Gees, How Can You Mend a Broken Heart? Barry Gibb, speaking to the CBS Monday morning program, stated that he would not watch the documentary. "It hurts to look back at my brothers. I can't do it. I simply can't. Who could? I think it's perfectly normal not to want to relive such pain, you know? I don't want to talk about it again." There was also a fourth Gibb brother named Andy. He was the youngest of all and resembled Barry not only in appearance but also in talent. There's a video about Andy on this channel, and I'll leave it on the end of the video. The legacy that the trio built will never be erased, and their successes will continue to be a part of many people's lives, whether in pop, rock, country, or disco music.